The difference between rimfire and centerfire has to do with where the primer or the priming source is for the cartridge itself. For a rimfire, the primer is located in the outer rim of the cartridge case. It's at the base of the case. It's formed when they're creating the case. It's kind of when they create the case to begin with, it's kind of a cup that's then flattened out and it makes a rim on the bottom. They then put priming material into the bottom of that, and it soaks down into the bottom and goes all the way around the rim. And then once that solidifies, they add the powder, put in the bullet, and the cartridge is completed. With a centerfire round, on the other hand, the priming material is put into a separate little metal cup, and then there's what's called an anvil that's put on top of it. And that creates, the entire assembly creates what's called the primer. The primer is then inserted into the cartridge as part of the manufacturing process into what they call the primer pocket in the cartridge. And it's basically a hole, it's in the very center of the cartridge. And then once the primer is put in, they add the powder, put in the bullet, and the cartridge is completed. Upon operation with a rimfire or a centerfire, the firing pin on a rimfire will strike the rim of the cartridge, and that will basically crimp the rim and strike it, and it crimps the metal in. That ignites the primer charge, which then ignites the gunpowder and fires the weapon. With a centerfire, the firing pin strikes the very center of the cartridge where the primer is, hits the primer in the center. There again, it crimps the outer edge of the primer cup against the anvil, and then that's what creates the crimp or the pressure to ignite the primer charge. The primer charge then ignites the powder and fires the projectile out of the weapon. Centerfire is generally considered much more reliable than rimfire. Rimfire, it's generally speaking that the quality is pretty good, but the priming material is put in and hopefully it goes all the way around all of that edge up underneath. Occasionally it doesn't, and what happens is if the firing pin hits that rimfire on the rim in a section where the priming material didn't make it there, the cartridge will not go off. Centerfire, on the other hand, the primer cup is a separate assembly, and the priming material is put in. It covers the absolute full bottom of the cup. The anvil's put on top, and then that whole assembly is then put into the cartridge itself. There's a lot more control over where the priming material is located, so they're very reliable. The failure rate's practically zero on those. Whereas on a rimfire, if you get a box of bulk ammunition, get say 300 or 400 rounds, it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 of those fail to function, what's called a dud round. Generally speaking, what you can do is once you safely remove the cartridge from the firearm, a couple minutes later you can put it back in, and now the firing pin will more than likely hit a different area of the rim, and in that area there probably is priming material and the cartridge will work fine. It's very rare that you have an instance where it won't work if you try it a second time or even a third time. However, if you try it a second time and it doesn't work, it's generally better to just not even mess with it and use it, because sometimes during the manufacture process it's possible none of the priming material at all made it into the rim. So I hope that helps you understand the difference between rimfire and centerfire. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me questions. I'll do my best to try to answer them. As always, if you have any comments, please send me comments. I'll try to respond to those as well. And please subscribe and add me to your channels you want to watch. And hopefully together we'll learn some interesting stuff. Until next week. Thanks.